directly participated in Ninth Circle ceremonies and killed children. And as soon as that came out, the Spanish government threatened to release that. 5 days later, he resigns. First time in 600 years a pope had done it. No coincidence at all, right?
Which ties into a question which was asked earlier, actually, about the Ninth Circle, as to whether any of the criminal acts had been investigated or prosecuted.
They've been attempts to do that, and they always get shut down. Always. There were several attempts to stop, and we had success actually in Montreal and just outside Brussels on 2 occasions. We were able to actually stop Ninth Circle ceremonies. Because you get the information and you get it out there, and there's honest cops that want to do the right thing, but it can cost them their life, like it did the Ottawa policeman Kel Gadban, who investigated it. Then he was found dead in the police station the next week of suicide, when he was a decorated policeman and a happy family man, right? So I mean, they don't mess around, these guys, right? And so that's more of the same crime, right?
If they've got trillions, if they're worth trillions, they can do anything, can't they, to anyone? So, Dusty, how do you fix the fact they traffic and shame? Can they make themselves relevant again?
No, because that's all based on a rotten idea, which is that we know what's better than you. To me, if you don't believe in emperor worship, then there's no way you can be a Catholic, because it's just a variation on that idea. So you see, you can take the words, talk is cheap, especially from a pulpit, right? You can spout all the words you want, but what do you do every day to uphold human dignity and defend human life? One of the reasons the Catholic Church is against abortion is because it cuts into their profit margin. They actively traffic newborn babies. There's a thing called the Baby for Adoption Protocol in Catholic hospitals all over North America and probably all over the world, but we've documented it here. And they have a list from adoption agencies and foster homes, a list of the number of babies they need. So they have, and we've talked to young women this has happened to, young Catholic girls who get pregnant. The priest and their parents convince them to give up the child in utero, signing away the baby. The baby's then trafficked. They make lots of money. I've spoken to people in Spain. This happened under the Franco dictatorship. They would traffic the children of political prisoners. Bergoglio, Pope Francis, who just died, he did that in Argentina. That's why he went from being a priest to the head of the Jesuits in just 19 years. Actually, it was shorter, I think 16. But anyway, because he was doing that. The military junta would control their opposition by grabbing their children. And the Catholic Church made billions out of this, and they still do. So, where does the dignity of the child and what does Jesus Christ come into any of that? Right? Remember what Christ said, his prescription for anyone to harm a child: tie a millstone around their neck and throw them in the nearest ocean. Well, should we enact that, folks?
I'd like to add a bit to that as well. So my mother's mother was jilted at the altar when she was pregnant, and the Catholic Church told my mother's mother that you will burn in hell. You cannot have a baby out of wedlock, and forced her to give my mother up. And the little baby was left, in this medical facility. And then, anyway, she ended up with a good family. It could have been much worse, but it caused my mother separation anxiety and trauma her entire life. And she wrote a book about it called The Blue Plastic Cow. And it still affects us to this day. She's in her 70s. It's kind of like been a defining thing that she didn't know. She spent decades trying to find her real mother and father. Right. And it's just really, really been the defining thing in her life. She only found out when she went to the doctor when she was a teenager, a routine appointment. And at the end of the appointment, the doctor said, "Oh, by the way, do you know you're adopted?" The whole world turned upside down from that moment.
Well, that's right, Sean. That's how close to home it is. And it's a culture of secrecy. Religion is the best vehicle for crime because, nobody would suspect they're talking about the love of Jesus. They wouldn't be trafficking children, would they? Well, the bigger the child rapist in town, the more sterling reputation he has to cover up what they're really doing. And that applies especially to religions, So there has to be one law for everybody. That's why, any of these churches that do these crimes, they shouldn't have tax exempt status. They shouldn't have diplomatic status like the Catholic Church has at the UN. You know, I go into that in great detail in this, but there has to be one law for everybody, or we live under tyranny. You know, if you're a child rapist, you know that you can become an ordained Catholic priest and you'll never be harmed. You can rape away, traffic children, law will never touch you. That's pretty much the case.
And we've seen it over and over again. And last week we had a lady on who was brutalized by the Catholic nuns in Ireland. That was a hell of a story as well.
Yeah.
All right. So Sky wants to know, well, let me preface this. It's a very long answer to this, Sky, that Kevin's got. And we did have 3 hours of Kevin's interviews on the channel this afternoon. You can get it in much more detail. Perhaps you can give a condensed version to this question. Can Kevin talk anything about the orphanage in Canada? I think it was in 1961 when the Queen visited there. I remember him talking about it before, I think, a long time ago.
You mean about the Queen abducting those children?
The disappearance of them, let's say, yeah.
That was October 1964. And my friend, who's now dead, William Coombs, witnessed it. She took 10 children. They were never seen again. That's one of the reasons she was subpoenaed, to come to the same common law court case that forced Ratzinger out of office, because it's common for these things to happen, you know. And in fact, we went into it further and discovered that 8 of the 10 children had died. 2 of them were taken back to England and used in ninth circle ceremonies in Carnarvon Castle in Wales. That's according to one of King Charles's own security advisors, Major Johnny Thompson. You know, and who then put a contract out on William Coombs. That's why he was killed. Arsenic poison in St. Paul's Hospital. So there's lots of this evidence out there. The problem isn't lack of evidence. It's where do you take it? How do you put the system on trial? Right? How do you defend children when it's a policy to traffic and torture and murder them? You know.
Yeah, go back to all the ancient religions. They would do that, wouldn't they, to the kids to like get the harvest, the crops growing and things like that.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because, you know, we know about Moloch, the fire god in ancient Canaan. You would throw your firstborn into it. And yeah, I'm sure people back then who were challenging that were accused of bashing Molochites because they dared to, you know, confront the child sacrificial ceremony that was necessary for the economy, right? But the ninth circle ceremonies often happen on what's called the Feast of Feralia and Terminalia, which were ancient Roman festivals where they would sacrifice animals and children to ensure the crop. This is between February 22nd and 24th. That's often satanic points of those days in the month, especially early in the year. You'll often find satanic rituals going on. So these are ancient practices, right?
Yeah, and we interviewed a guy, I think it was last year, who managed to get inside Moloch at Bohemian Grove.
Yeah, yeah.
He got a lot of threats after that.
Well, the thing is, Sean, you can't operate in the world of big money or politics or religion without encountering this. And, you know, that's why the idea that one of these people who are up in the elite are going to save all of us, right, is a fallacy. I mean, people play that off to gain support and money all the time for themselves, but they're in the club and you're not in it. And it's time we all unite across all these divisions and stop these killers, child killers, you know.
So Laureen wants to know, what do you think was the purpose of Vice President J.D. Vance's visit to the Vatican?
Well, just to guarantee loyalty. I mean, who knows? Like, that's the point. You don't really know what's being done. You know, you're allowed to see certain things. It doesn't mean it's really what's going on. Same reason Biden went to Rome, and you know, because don't forget, it comes down to money. The Vatican Bank money is going to China. Could be about that. Could be about, you know, like what I mentioned earlier. The Vatican Bank's underwriting the economic takeover of North America by China, not just resources, but what's called the Road and Belt Initiative. They're tell you, driving down the highway in Canada, there's a sign. It'll say $85 billion road construction. Hello? $85 billion for road construction? This is massive restructuring of the transportation. And you get it all over the world. China's buying up the trains, the seaports. About 90% of the containers in Seattle and Vancouver port are all owned by China. So, I'm sure that him going to Rome has something to do with that, working out deals.
All right, we've got over 1,000 watching live right now. Please support Kevin and his links in the description box. Please keep the questions coming in while we've got him in the library. And Sega wants to know, Kevin, have you had any supernatural, unexplainable experiences?
Yeah, yes, I have. And I don't talk about them because I don't think people would believe them. But I can tell you one thing that happened, which was kind of interesting. And this was in the height of when I was expanding over to Europe and we began to set up the tribunal. I was set up to be killed in Vancouver one night because I do a lot of street work there, street ministry when I was younger, and people all know me. So this native woman said, Kev, I need your help. I'm being evicted. And I went into her place, and it was a setup because there were two guys there with a knife waiting, and I would have been dead. And I don't drink. I don't do drugs. I'm very cogent, okay? The next thing I knew, I was out on the street. Don't ask me how. I didn't black out, nothing happened. I was just out on the street. I wasn't there anymore. And I got the hell out of there, of course. But the point is, I don't have an explanation for that. I don't try to put any kind of label on it. I just know that when you're doing the right thing, you're protected. And you don't give up, and you're not afraid of these people, because that's the main way they control people, through greed and fear. So that's one example. But there've been other things. I mean, I took part in exorcisms, including one outside the Vatican just before the tornado hit. I think you know that story.
Could you please repeat it?
October 11th, 2009, I was invited to go to the Vatican, St. Peter's Square. And it's funny because when you're standing in St. Peter's Square, you're not allowed to do any kind of protest or ceremony, or the Vatican cops arrest you immediately. And that had happened to some native elders before. So there I am, standing in the middle of St. Peter's Square. I was asked to do a ceremony for the missing children. And then when I was there, I thought, wait a minute, we're in the heart of the beast here. We need to do some kind of exorcism right here. Get this thing out of here. So I did. I began the first stage of an exorcism, which is calling on the entity, the possessing entity, to reveal itself. And these cops were walking by me like I wasn't there. They were looking right at me, and I wasn't stopped or harassed once. Next morning, about 8 o'clock, a tornado hits the center of Rome, first time in 48 years. And that same week, the European press started reporting Ratzinger's role in ordering bishops to cover up child rape. So that's no accident. I mean, it wasn't me. It was something working through me at that moment, calling out the entity to name itself. And ever since then, this stuff has never stopped. The exposure of this stuff is just constant. So you got to be in the right place at the right time and just trust that power, right?
And so the viewers could fully understand the risks you've been taking and continue to take, could you explain the other attempts on your life, Kevin?
Well, you mentioned I was poisoned in 2021 in the summer. And that was just before I mentioned it had to do with the Ninth Circle ceremony we were stopping in Montreal. And I almost died from it. I actually went off into a native community, and some traditional elders were kind of working on me, withdrawing stuff from me. But it was like a psychic attack as well. So anyway, there was that. There've been other attempts, too many to mention, really. And isn't just taking my kids and blacklisting me. I'll give you an example. Just about 6 months ago, I was invited by some Vancouver teachers to speak to them about their curriculum and how it doesn't mention any of the stuff in murderbydecree.com. They were trying to get around the censorship of the real genocide that happened. I was in that conference about 20 minutes when the principal showed up and told me to leave. He said, the Vancouver School Board has expressed concern about you being here. And I said, really? Why would that be? But it's that censorship is constantly in place, and why would it be, right? If they bought off all the survivors and dealt with the issue, it's because it's this ongoing crime they know I'm not going to let up on, right, in exposing this. So, I mean, I've been lucky so far, but the reason I like being on these shows is people need to know this knowledge. If anything did happen to you, they need to carry this on. So that's my focus now. You find your purpose and you're invincible in a way, right?
Kevin, we've got 30 people a day here in the UK being arrested for social media posts. What's it got like in Canada? I mean, Trump's, talking about freedom of speech, and it seems that some of the platforms have eased up a bit, but our government has just doubled down the other way.
Oh, it gets worse everywhere all the time. And, I mean, I'll tell you, one of the reasons it's getting worse is with China so openly operating now everywhere here in North America. You can't really mention that without getting instantly slammed. One of the things we found out is the so-called deportations are not deportations. A lot of them are people being trafficked into private prisons in America, slave labor. Pam Bondi, who's Trump's attorney general, is a former lobbyist for the private prisons. And you got them in England too. I've had my friend Owen was stuck in one. And for 6 weeks without a charge. They make money off them. It's a cash cow, just like Native people are on reservations. Behind the rhetoric of deportation and all that, that's not what's going on at all. It's the old money game. I mean, Trump International launders money for the Mexican drug cartels, who are the main force in trafficking people all over North America. So, yeah, the fact that a politician would profit from legislation personally, I mean, that's the game. It doesn't matter if the Republicans, the Democrats are doing it. Everybody does it. And that's why we shouldn't rely on these father figure politicians. We need to just rely on our own common sense and ability to take action ourselves, because it's not going to come from above, right?
Yeah, we've had a few guys on breaking down the government contracts to, housing, the unfettered immigration here. It's in the billions, hundreds of millions. If they go to prison, the private prison contracts, Serco is a big one that's in on it here. And we've got a guy coming on tomorrow at 9 p.m. He's the leader of a party called Britain First, viewers. So he will probably be talking about some of that as well. All right. Good. So we've got tons more questions here backed up. Let me see. Here's one from Nikki. In the 1960s, 1970s, the indigenous women in Greenland were being sterilized. Was that a decision of the church?
Oh, well, historically, the Catholic Church has been right in the forefront of sterilization of indigenous people. It's like the relationship between Big Pharma and the churches. For many years, they fund the theological centers and the churches. And in turn, the churches provide children for drug testing experiments. That not just natives or indigenous people in Greenland, but all over the world they do that. But the Catholic Church had a particular role in the sterilization, the development of sterilizing drugs, because they owned the companies that had a major interest in companies like Roche, Pfizer, some of the early Nazi pharmaceutical companies that had direct tie to the Vatican Bank. And their policy is, they say, well, pro-life, but just for white Catholics folks. Although they can't be too blatant about it, because most of their members now are Black or Asian, and Black, that part of the world is where most of the members are. So they're going to be very discreet about talking about that. But it's been their long policy to do that, and hiding behind the pro-life rhetoric.
86 wants to know, were the scriptures interpreted by man as well?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, we all interpret, right? We all see things through our own lens. I don't think they're absolute truth, but they're going to be seen in the context of the deeper message, right? Which is a universal message, I think. Respect each other.
Let me preface this question, Kevin, with YouTube prohibits us wishing physical harm on people. So I will give you the question, and that is, how the hell can we get rid of these deviant, corrupt people who rule our lives?
Just ignore them. Pull away from them. Don't inflate their balloon by protesting them or lobbying them or even attacking them. There's no point. Just withdraw and create your own balloon. They deflate that's been our big focus now in setting up our own assemblies and common law courts and grassroots spiritual communities based on the land. That's how we get rid of their system. Anyway, the individuals are just a symptom of something sicker. There's no point in attacking individuals. And that's been the focus of our common law court going back 20 years, that we put the institution on trial, not just individuals who are responsible for particular crimes. Also, don't forget they're destroying themselves. And, just keep the long view, in other words.
So Jake wants to know, is Kevin as sure as I am that the rituals is directly related to demonic possession by principalities, principles, due to the world-consuming suffering?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've had direct experience of that. What they call RKK exousiae in the New Testament, or the powers, principalities and powers means the unseen authorities, the things that, like physicists say, you can't see about 80% of the universe, right? These unseen influences, the subconscious in the human mind, right? It's like maximum or minimum, it's all the same phenomena that we can't detect a lot.